health span, and lifespan, all within the big picture of your Catholic faith. Today on The Simple Truth, a part 2 from last time, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. I'm Jim Havens. It is Wholeness and Healing Monday, fighting to cultivate the health of the whole person, mind, body, and soul, with our co-host, my lovely wife, Becky Havens. Becky is a Catholic wife and mother with a passion and calling to educate people about the importance of caring for our bodies that the Lord has blessed us with by living a healthy lifestyle. She helps others to think outside the cultural norms and to be their own advocate while not falling into the many pressures of modern medicine. She's the author of Toxin Free in 12 Months, a 12-month guide to help you transition over to a toxin-free lifestyle. She also wrote a boycott list of over 600 pro-abortion companies. You can get both those resources for free and learn more at her website, safehavensmama.com. That's safehavensmama.com. Again, our disclaimer, we're not doctors, not scientists, just regular people looking to live well and raise our family. We do believe in objective truth and in asking questions when things do not make sense. We're not giving medical advice, but we do want to offer a forum here today. We know a thing or two. There's still a ton we don't know, though. And we do have some personal experiences, as do you. And we would love to hear from you during the show today. We'll put the phone number out in a little bit. We also put a morning survey out there today. We're not going to be able to get to every survey response, but we'll do our best to get as many in as we can. But it's always best to call in with any comment or question that you might have. So, Becky, as we go into this part 2 today on the science of aging and longevity, look, you're in your early 40s. How often do you think about this topic at all, aging and longevity, health span and lifespan? Is this the first time you've thought much about it as we kind of dive into these topics as part 1, part 2 today?
No, I think it's something that's, always on everybody's minds. I feel like you're kind of always thinking about longevity, like ways to stay healthy, ways to practice different, diets or exercises. And I feel like I kind of ebb and flow. I've had times of different diets and different exercise programs, but really as I get older, I've kind of lacked quite a bit of discipline in these areas because, you got to really be motivated and stick to it. And as you get older, it's definitely harder to keep the weight off and to, get the achieved results as you get older. It's not like it used to be. You can't just eat what you want to eat and just expect to, stay at your same weight at a certain point. Your body doesn't, work that way. And so certainly I've, looked into many things in this area, especially when it comes to women's health, because when you realize the amount of women who are getting breast cancer or different types of cancers or hormonal imbalances or thyroid issues, you kind of stop and think like those people were my age, or that's not that far off from me. And, what can I do to prevent that? What's my best option to not go down that path? And so certainly I'm thinking about that. And I know we've talked about this a lot, and it really seems to be pretty simple. So the hang up for me is just getting disciplined and getting to it. And you kind of always wait for the best time to start, and there's really no best time to start. So hopefully this show gives me the push I'm looking for myself.
Yeah, and the catalyst for these discussions last week and this week has been this book called Outlive: The Science and Art of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. Now, he's a secular doctor, at least that's how he presents himself. We don't know anything about Dr. Attia's faith or lack thereof. That's just not something he goes into, really. But last time we did break open a lot of the framework and the philosophy surrounding a lot of this, including how we would bring some context to this in terms of the Catholic faith. And we started to get into some of the practical tactics at the end of last week's show, extending health span, extending lifespan. And we want to continue on that today, drilling down on what they are, those practical tactics, and consider ways to apply them to our busy lives. I think there is going to be a lot here that's going to be helpful in terms of motivation for folks, because the data is motivating when you really look at it. And so as we approach this, again, just a little bit of context around this in terms of science. We didn't talk about this last time, but there's limitations to science, right? The science isn't going to, we can't just say the science is telling us everything here. This is all open and shut. Here's the list. You just do this and you're good to go. There is data from various studies, and we want to take a look at some of that data. This is, I think, one of the strong points of this book, Outlive, is Dr. Attia presents a lot of data that is very helpful, but we still have to apply that data. And also, studies are not perfect. There's various things that can be off a little bit in terms of trying to isolate different control groups and make sure that you're really studying what you're trying to study for. And none of these things is a perfect sort of science, but it does give you a helpful look when you can kind of take some of this data and start to reflect upon it and try to apply it. And so there are great benefits, obviously, for science and data. I'm just saying that it's limited. Just consider, I guess, what we went through during COVID times when we had authorities trying to tell us, trust the science. And even when it comes to climate change alarmism, the idea that there's a scientific consensus and that this is what it is. We all ought to be alarmed about this existential threat. We know that the data is actually being manipulated in these ways. And people who are claiming to say, trust the science, you have to believe this, science says so, they don't have a full picture of all the data. And they know that. And so there's political maneuvering that people do around the data. So we want to actually take a look at data and not just trust people who are saying trust the science and all of that. So science is very good when we're looking at good data. There is a way things work in the physical world, and we want to understand that. And so there's also a way things work in the spiritual world. We want to understand that as well. And, theology has often been called the queen of the sciences. I think it was St. Thomas Aquinas that maybe coined that, but philosophy's also been labeled that at times. And this is an idea that even though the physical sciences, they're measuring what our senses can observe, we also have the theological science and the philosophical science that measure things that we can't necessarily observe, but can understand. In the case of theology, looking at the coordinates of divine revelation, in philosophy, natural reason, and then actually doing some work and understanding how things work based on these truths, these philosophical and theological truths. So science is important, but it is broader than just the physical sciences as well. But when we're looking at the data today, a lot of what we're looking at is physical science data, and that's what we're going to take a look at. Becky, I want to get you in here on that if there's anything you want to say about that. But also, we're applying this in a way that is not a one-size-fits-all in every case. We have to also be thinking about a couple different factors. Number one is that every individual is different. So what is objectively true? What is universal to everybody? And what is not? What is subjective? What might need to be tailored or customized from individual to individual, and see how they respond to various things. And also, what is that individual's state in life? What are the responsibilities of their state in life? We have to prioritize those things as well. And so we also need to be mindful of those factors. For instance, I know one of the tactics here, one of the categories that is important is sleep and the tactics around sleep. We would both love to have optimal sleep, but because of our state in life, we have young children, specifically an infant in the house. Sleep is not something that we're going to be able to really have the ideal on, because there's limitations in our state in life. And so we have to try to understand that and apply things in a smart way based on that. We can't try to run away from our responsibilities of our state in life to try to do this other thing that is helpful for aging and longevity. The state in life comes first, but how can we not use that as an excuse and fit in these important things as well around it? So Becky, anything you want to share or anything you want to say on any of that?
Yeah, so that's where it comes in. We have to trust God in the end. So some things are out of our control. So the state of life that one may be in can be out of your control. If you're a mom with infants, there's only so much you can do on your end to protect yourself from things that might happen to your body from lack of sleep, and you just give the rest to God and rely on the graces, because there are going to be seasons where it's not going to be set up exactly the way that you want it. Schedules change and different things come up, and we're all constantly changing, and our situations are changing, and state in life is changing, and especially true with illness and kids and any kind of like tragedy or difficulty that goes on. I mean, that affects your sleep in every single way. And so we have to really, at that point, not get obsessed with, I have to make sure I'm getting this, and that, but completely rely on God and just say, God, you have to take this part because I can't control this. And that's why in the end, we do everything we can do, and then we give the rest to God. And you can do everything possible to make yourself healthy and avoid cancer and avoid this and that. And you might still get it for some reason that's unknown to us. So as long as we're doing our job, and yeah, like you said, Jim, not making excuses and doing what we need, we just have to, remember to leave the rest to God.
Yeah. And at the same time, on the other side of the coin there, when it comes to state in life, that's also one of the things that really drives us to want to implement better tactics when it comes to aging and longevity. We want to be around for our kids as they get older. We want to be around for potential grandchildren or even great-grandchildren, to be able to help raise them in the faith, strong in the faith, having a generational line of faith to really help them and build them up. So we want to be around if it is God's will. We want to do our part to make sure that our health span and lifespan is what it ought to be. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned.
The Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network presents Saints and Seasons. On June 10th, we celebrate the feast of St. Margaret of Scotland, Queen and Widow. Margaret was born in Hungary in the mid-11th century, the daughter of Prince Edward the Exile and granddaughter of Edmund Ironside, King of the English. Margaret's great-uncle, King St. Edward the Confessor, summoned Margaret's father back to England, hoping to leave the crown to his long-lost nephew. But Prince Edward died not long after arriving. When the Norman conquest began, Margaret's family fled England, but their ship was wrecked on the coast of Scotland. King Malcolm III, of Shakespearean fame, was struck by Margaret's piety, intelligence, and beauty, and they wed in the year of our Lord 1070. The young queen immediately exerted a great and holy influence over her husband and her new country. To Malcolm, she bore 8 pious children, including the future King St. David I. She and Malcolm often served the poor at table with their own hands, and she founded many churches and monasteries, all the while encouraging greater unity with Rome. The Pearl of Scotland, as Margaret was lovingly known, lost her husband and eldest son in battle just 4 days before her own holy death, in the year of our Lord 1093. She is celebrated on November 16th in the modern calendar. Also honored on this day are St. Tertullius and companions, St. Landry, St. Ithamar, the first Anglo-Saxon bishop, and many other martyrs, confessors, and holy virgins. For more about the saints and seasons of the Catholic Church, visit thestationofthecross.com/saints and seasons.
The Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network is dedicated to answering the critical need of access to quality, consistent, professional, and proven Catholic programming. We cannot rely on other media outlets to properly represent our church. Catholic radio reaches Catholics, non-Catholic Christians, and non-believers alike. As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent of your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported.
Back to the Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here, getting tactical today on aging and longevity. And I just want to, read a little bit to get us started as we drill down on this, looking at this book, Outlive: The Science and Art of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. He says the following: the odds are overwhelming that you will die as a result of one of the chronic diseases of aging that I call the 4 horsemen: heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, or type 2 diabetes, and related metabolic dysfunction. It goes on to say that each of the horsemen is intricately complex, more of a disease process than an acute illness like a common cold. The surprise is that this is actually good news for us in a way. Each of the horsemen is cumulative, the product of multiple risk factors adding up and compounding over time. Many of these same individual risk factors, it turns out, are relatively easy to reduce or even eliminate. Even better, they share certain features or drivers in common that make them vulnerable to some of the same tactics and behavioral changes. It goes on to say that a paradigm-shifting approach to medicine, one that directs our efforts toward preventing chronic diseases and improving our health span, and doing it now rather than waiting until disease has taken hold or until our cognitive and physical function has already declined. It's not preventative medicine, it's proactive medicine. He says the horsemen do have one powerful risk factor in common, and that is age. As you grow older, the risk grows exponentially that one or more of these diseases has begun to take hold in your body. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about our chronological age. But what do we mean by aging exactly? It's not merely the passage of time, but what is happening inside us, beneath the surface, in our organs and our cells as time passes. The actions we take to improve our health span will almost always result in a longer lifespan. This is why our tactics are largely aimed at improving health span first. The lifespan benefits will follow. He says we have 5 tactical domains that we can address in order to alter someone's health. The first is exercise, which I consider to be by far the most potent domain in terms of its impact on both lifespan and health span. Of course, exercise is not just one thing, so I break it down into its components of aerobic efficiency, maximum aerobic output, VO2 max, strength, and stability, all of which we'll discuss in more detail. Next is diet or nutrition, or as I prefer to call it, nutritional biochemistry. The third domain is sleep, which has gone underappreciated by Medicine 2.0. That's what he calls the old paradigm. He says, until relatively recently. The fourth domain encompasses a set of tools and techniques to manage and improve emotional health. Our fifth and final domain consists of the various drugs, supplements, and hormones that doctors learn about in medical school and beyond. I lump these into one bucket called exogenous molecules, meaning molecules we ingest that come from outside of the body. End of quote. So that kind of gives us a little bit of a layout here as we get into some of the tactics. And in particular, what I really want to spend some time on is drilling down on what he calls by far the most potent domain in terms of its impact on both lifespan and health span, and that is exercise. So we're going to spend some time on that. But first, in our morning survey, we did ask people about this. We said, how important do you believe that exercise is on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not important at all, 10 being extremely important? And believe it or not, every single person who answered the survey said 10, that exercise they believe is extremely important. Here are some examples when we asked about exercise habits that people might have. And Joe from Rentham chimed in. He said 1 hour, 2 days in a row, followed by 1 day of rest, repeat, repeat, repeat. So a pretty good plan. And he says the benefits that he has noticed from these habits: manage weight, increase muscle mass, and reduce stress. All very good. And then Katerina from Newton, Massachusetts said power walking, squats, sometimes weights. And she says, yes, I feel so much healthier in my body and mind, happier. I have so much more energy. My moods are better. And then here's one more from Anonymous. Anonymous said walking daily, squats, side-to-side leg lunges, stretching. And Anonymous said it helps to keep me thin. So those are some good examples, some from some of our respondents. Becky, as we start to think about drilling down on the tactics of exercise, anything that jumps out to you here based on what you've heard already?
Yeah, when I hear of those exercises, I start to get tired, even in my mind, thinking about it. And I think that's where I'm stuck, is that I'm always tired. We're in the phase where, we have a baby and he's up all night long, off and on all night long. And I've not really experienced that with my own children. He's a foster child and he just has different needs. And it's a new experience for me. And even in that, God provides you know, the strength to just get like my daily activities. But when I think about, oh man, I'm going to add an exercise, I feel like it's going to make me more tired, or I feel like it's going to burn me out even more because I'm in this state of just kind of like survival, like got to get through the night, got to get a little bit of sleep. So I'm curious. Yeah. Like, is that something that would be good for somebody? Now, I think I already know your answer, Jim. You're going to just say, go for a walk. And that's probably the best thing you could do right now. I would think that, you know, like intense exercise could have an effect where it would maybe burn you out and, you know, raise cortisol levels in an unhealthy way. But of course, walking, that seems like that would be good. Power walking, maybe even. So it's just getting out and doing it. You know, I have no excuse. We live in Florida, so it's hot and it's almost never rains and it's sunny almost every day. So I can't complain about that. It's just getting out and doing it, right? So this is good for me, getting some motivation here.
You have a natural sauna every time you walk out your door. And two categories that we're thinking of as, you know, a little spoiler alert. Well, I think we already mentioned this, and this is quite obvious, but we're going to lay out some of the data behind it. And that is that it's actually very important to have some aerobic activity. If you're not moving around much in terms of walking or running or anything like that, wherever you're at, you want to take a next step. So get out there for a walk. If you're not used to walking, if you are used to walking, maybe a little bit of a jog. We're going to get into why that's important, but also some strength training as well. Muscle mass is something that's very important, especially as we age, to maintain, because that's one of the things we lose as we age. And so we want to make sure that we're in a good shape there. Again, we'll get into the details of why that's important, which I think is really helpful, again, to motivate us when we understand these details and how important it is. But if you think about those two categories, and then you start to think of, okay, what can I do for some aerobic activity? What can I do for a little bit of strength training activity? And based on whatever you're doing now, just do a little bit more. And then once that becomes a good habit, then you just do a little bit more. I think the hardest part, though, is if you're kind of doing nothing, to go from that to just doing something very small. Because once you build that into your day, this is the time that I do this, even if it's something very small, you've gone from nothing until this. Now you have a time block where you're doing something small. Now you can build on that time block. Now you know this is the time I show up for this every day. And then you can just build from small to a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. But I think the hardest part really is going from not having that time block to starting having that time block, and then making that a non-negotiable, that you're going to show up for that every day. This is your time block for exercise, and you're going to be faithful to that. I do want to give the phone number out for anybody that has any comments or questions on any of this today. 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. And so, let's go back to the book and hear a little bit more here. Again, Outlive the Science and Art of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. And I'm not endorsing the entire book. I've not read the entire book, so I can't do that. I also think it may mention something about yoga, which we would not endorse that aspect at all, or any sort of new age practices that could be there in the book that we're not aware of. But a lot of this data is very interesting. So regarding exercise, he says that the data are unambiguous. Exercise not only delays actual death, but also prevents both cognitive and physical decline better than any other intervention. We also tend to feel better when we exercise, so it probably has some harder to measure effect on emotional health as well. He even has a whole chapter dedicated to this, which is entitled Exercise, the Most Powerful Longevity Drug. He says that more than any other tactical domain we discuss in this book, exercise has the greatest power to determine how you will live out the rest of your life. There are reams of data supporting the notion that even a fairly minimal amount of exercise can lengthen your life by several years. It delays the onset of chronic diseases pretty much across the board, but it is also amazingly effective at extending and improving health span. Not only does it reverse physical decline, which I suppose is somewhat obvious, but it can slow or reverse cognitive decline as well. It also has benefits in terms of emotional health, although those are harder to quantify. So if you adopt only one new set of habits based on reading this book, it must be in the realm of exercise. If you currently exercise, you will likely want to rethink and modify your program. And if exercise is not a part of your life at the moment, you are not alone. 77% of the U.S. population is like you. Now is the time to change that, right now. Even a little bit of daily activity is much better than nothing. Going from 0 weekly exercise to just 90 minutes per week can reduce your risk of dying from all causes by 14%. It's very hard to find a drug that can do that. He goes on to say that, first, I want to spend some time exploring why exercise is so important, because I find the data around it to be so persuasive. When I share these data with my patients, they are rarely surprised by the fact that high aerobic fitness and strength are associated with longer lifespan and health span, but they are always amazed by the magnitude of the benefit. The data on exercise tell us with great clarity that the more we do, the better off we will be. Let's start with cardiorespiratory or aerobic fitness. This means how efficiently your body can deliver oxygen to your muscles and how efficiently your muscles can extract that oxygen, enabling you to run or walk or cycle or swim long distances. It also comes into play in daily life, manifesting as physical stamina. The more aerobically fit you are, the more energy you will have for whatever you enjoy doing. So we're going to get into this more in a little bit, but first I want to stop here and just see what jumps out to you so far and what's been stated, Becky.
So I got my calculator out because I couldn't even figure it out in my mind. But that only means 13 minutes a day. That's pretty manageable, if you ask me. When you break it down like that, I hear 90 minutes a week and I'm like, oh, that's like, hours in a few days span. But if you do 13 minutes a day, that's actually very manageable. And I guess it could be something as simple as, like you stated, walking or some kind of fast walking or, I think most Americans, well, I'm hoping most Americans, that was another thing that was staggering. 77% of people do not exercise. That's very telling. That's why, we have the disease numbers that we do here. And why when COVID came, one of the main risk factors was obesity. So 77% of people likely had some type of, issue because they're not exercising. So, that's pretty sad, actually, that, I say that because I'm one of those 77%. I'm not exercising daily. I'm active, so does that count? If you're just active, if I put a stepometer on me all day, I have a feeling I would be taking a lot of steps, but maybe that's not enough. Maybe you need to set the time aside, like you're saying, Jim. So that's my spot. That's my time to exercise just for me. And then the other stuff is just great. That's the bonus. You get a little bit of extra here and there, right?
Yeah, and you can think of it like the time that you spend in the dedicated exercise portion, that's going to actually help you in those other times to have more stamina, to be able to do those responsibilities, and for it not to be as taxing for you. And that's really one of the main benefits of all of this in terms of health span immediately, how that really helps you now. So we're going to get into what is VO2 max, as well as what is zone 2 aerobic training. This is really where the most effective gains are to be found, and it's not as difficult as you might think. So we're going to get into this when we get back. Stay tuned.
In 1937, 20 years after Our Lady appeared in Fatima, Pope Pius XI wrote the encyclical on atheistic communism, precisely to warn the faithful about Russia's errors. Pope Pius XI, quote, "Atheistic communism aims at upsetting the social order and undermining the very foundations of Christian civilization. For the first time in history, we are witnessing a struggle, cold-blooded in purpose and mapped out to the least detail between man and all that is called God," close quote. Now that is really interesting, because right there, the Pope is quoting from 2 Thessalonians 2:4. That's the section that St. Paul is writing about the Antichrist. This satanic scourge is in opposition both to reason and to divine revelation. Entire peoples find themselves in danger of falling back into a barbarism worse than that which oppressed the greater part of the world at the coming of the Redeemer. Well, look around. Here we are.
That's Sermons for Everyday Living from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
Can we be happy without God? Atheists say yes, we Christians say yes, but only to a certain extent. What's our reason? There are some natural human desires that can be satisfied without living for God. The desire for sensory pleasure, success, and loving relationships. There are certain desires, however, that can't be satisfied without God. For example, we don't just desire some love, we desire infinite love, love without limit. This is manifest when we get frustrated with imperfect manifestations of it. The same is true for knowledge, justice, and beauty. Since God alone is infinite in these perfections, only He can satisfy our desires for them. Therefore, to borrow from St. Augustine, without God, our hearts would be forever restless. And my friends, a restless heart is an unhappy heart. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here talking about some of the science with aging and longevity today, specifically breaking down the tactic of exercise. What's most effective? What do we need to know? If you have any questions or comments, feel free to call in 1-877-511-5483, 1-877-511-5483. Going back to the book Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia, he says that it turns out that peak aerobic cardiorespiratory fitness measured in terms of VO2 max is perhaps the single most powerful marker for longevity. VO2 max represents the maximum rate at which a person can utilize oxygen. Goes on to say that this is measured naturally while a person is exercising at essentially their upper limit of effort. Says that if you ever had this test done, you will know just how unpleasant it is. And I don't think I've ever had this test done. I have had a stress test, which is kind of what it sort of sounds like. I'm not sure if they measure the VO2 max in that. I don't remember getting a determination on that. But I do have a watch that I wear when I run, and it does give me a resulting VO2 max. I just don't know how accurate that is based on just wearing a wristwatch. So not really sure. But he goes on to say here that the more oxygen your body is able to use, the higher your VO2 max. So this is a number we want to be aware of if we can. Now, there'd be a lot more to research here about how you can measure this accurately and effectively, and then what that measurement would mean. But for our purposes here, we just want to understand that this is a marker that is very important, that is telling us how important aerobic exercise is. And to understand it a little bit more, he says that VO2 max is typically expressed in terms of the volume of oxygen a person can use per kilogram of body weight per minute. This number is not just relevant to athletes. It turns out to be highly correlated with longevity. A 2018 study in JAMA that followed more than 120,000 people found that the higher the VO2 max measured via a treadmill test was associated with lower mortality across the board. The fittest people had the lowest mortality rates by a surprising margin. Consider this. A person who smokes has a 40% greater risk of all-cause mortality. That is, risk of dying at any moment, than someone who does not smoke, representing a hazard ratio of 1.4. This study found that someone of below average VO2 max for their age and sex, that is between the 25th and 50th percentiles, is at double the risk of all-cause mortality compared to someone in the top quartile, 75th to 97.6th percentiles. Thus, poor cardiorespiratory fitness carries a greater relative risk of death than smoking. So this was one piece of data that I found to be most impressive in the sense that it ought to impress upon us how important aerobic activity is, cardiorespiratory fitness. And so again, it's saying that if you are below average for VO2 max, meaning for aerobic activity, if you're below average in the way that your body is able to receive this oxygen, expressed in terms of, I guess the more oxygen your body is able to use, then that means that you're at double the risk of all-cause mortality versus someone who's in the top quartile, 75% and above. So doesn't that motivate you to say, well, what do I need to do to get into that 75% or above? That is a huge difference. Becky, any thoughts when you hear that data?
Yeah, that's my next question is, so how do you get there? Is that just reserved for, the strongest, the most athletic type of people, or can you get there just by doing that, 13-minute workout each day or 30-minute workout each day? And is it something that's acquired over time? Like, is it, each day your number gets better and better as you become more and more fit, and therefore it's achievable to get to that space. Is that correct?
Definitely is achievable. And how much time? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have seen the answer on that, but I do know zone 2 aerobic training seems to be what the answer is. So I want to get into what that zone 2 training is. So I think the 13 minutes a day or the 90 minutes a week of some sort of activity, just doing something is far better than doing nothing. Again, no drug is going to give you that 14% increase, I think it was, from in the mortality or just being able to avoid those 4 horsemen or whatever it is, that 14% bump that you get from doing something. I think that's what we were talking about. But the zone 2 training is where you see really big gains. But you can't get to the zone 2 training unless you start by doing something. But just to drill down just a little bit more here on the VO2 max, because there is that question about how do I get into that 75%. But then there's even a question to say, what happens if I really keep going? What happens if I get into the real top levels there? It says someone in the bottom quartile of VO2 max for their age group, the least fit 25%, is nearly 4 times likelier to die than someone in the top quartile and 5 times likelier to die than a person with elite level VO2 max, the top 2.3%. Having a higher VO2 max is better for your overall health and longevity than having a lower VO2 max, period. Even better news for our purposes is that VO2 max can be increased via training. We can move the needle a lot on this measure of fitness. He says that muscle may be almost as powerfully correlated with living longer. So here he gets into the strength training some, and then we'll loop back around to that zone 2 training, that aerobic training. But he says muscle may be almost as powerful correlated with living longer. A 10-year observational study of roughly 4,500 subjects aged 50 and older found that those with low muscle mass were 40 to 50% greater risk of mortality than controls over the study period. Further analysis revealed that it's not the mere muscle mass that matters, but the strength of those muscles, their ability to generate force. It's not enough to build up big pecs or biceps in the gym. Those muscles also have to be strong. They have to be capable of creating force. Subjects with low muscle strength were at double the risk of death, while those with low muscle mass and or low muscle strength plus metabolic syndrome had a 3 to 3.33 times greater risk of all-cause mortality. Strength may even trump cardiorespiratory fitness, at least one study suggests. Researchers following a group of approximately 1,500 men with over 40 with hypertension for an average of about 18 years found that even if a man was in the bottom half of cardiorespiratory fitness, his risk of all-cause mortality was still almost 48% lower if he was in the top third of the group in terms of strength versus the bottom third. It's pretty much the same story we saw with VO2 max. The fitter you are, the lower your risk of death. Again, there is no other intervention, drug or otherwise, that can rival this magnitude of benefit. Exercise is so effective against diseases of aging, the horsemen, that it has often been compared to medicine. And then he gets into really the science on this. I don't know. I think it's very interesting. I don't know that we have time to really get into all of the science on this, but I will just add a little bit here where he says that seniors with the least muscle mass are at the greatest risk of dying from all causes. So we want to avoid that, right? He says your exoskeleton, your muscle, is what keeps your actual skeleton, your bones, upright and intact. Having more muscle mass on your exoskeleton appears to protect you from all kinds of trouble, even adverse outcomes following surgery. But most important, it is highly correlated with a lower risk of falling, a leading but oft ignored cause of death and disability in the elderly. Just as with the VO2 max, it is important to maintain muscle mass at all costs. Exercise in all its forms is our most powerful tool against fighting this misery and reducing our risk of death across the board. It slows the decline, not just physically, but across all 3 vectors of health span, including cognitive and emotional health. And so muscle mass is obviously very important. I don't know if you recall last week, Becky, when we were talking about some of the tactics of nutrition, and we were talking about high protein intake and how the goal, really the ideal, is to have a gram of protein per pound of body weight. I was thinking about this over the past week. That is a lot of protein. And as I'm eating and thinking, okay, how much protein do I need to have? It's almost not doable. For me, somebody who weighs over 200, low 200s, it's like, that's a lot of protein to be trying to figure out how to eat that much protein. But why is this the ideal? Why is this the goal? Why is that an important tactic in terms of nutrition? It's all about muscle mass, because that's how important muscle mass is, having that strong exoskeleton is, especially as we age, because as we age, everything's working against us in terms of muscle mass, trying to break that down. So the more we build it up, the more strength we have going in, and the more we can maintain that, the better we're going to be in terms of health span, lifespan, balance, things that we don't even oftentimes think about. Becky, anything from this section jump out to you?
Yeah, so this is good news. This is something that we can do ourselves. We don't need a prescription for it. We don't need a doctor's note, nothing. We can just do it ourselves. So I think the main thing is, and what oftentimes is the lie that many people believe, is that the older you get, the more you should take it easy. Like, that's dangerous. You might fall if you start working out, or you might hurt yourself. That's too heavy, but actually it seems to be that the body does really well when it's challenged. So I think it's good to know that our bodies are capable of so much, and that it's not unsafe. And many people, especially as you get older, even, those like 80 and older. So you think this is something that even if they're, have a hard time walking, they can still lift weights. And that's something that they could do to maintain their strength. Like, let's make this really easy for everybody. Do you think that's what he's saying? It's like something that it doesn't matter your age, just you can start at any time and your body can do this. This is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, he gives this example, which I think is a great one. He says, we want to redefine what is possible in our later years and wipe away the default assumption that most people will be weak and incapable at that point in their lives. We need to abolish the decrepit stereotype and create a new narrative, perhaps modeled after the old school fitness guru Jack LaLanne, who kept doing his usual rigorous daily workout right up until his death at age 96. Unlike most very long-lived individuals, he didn't just get there by accident or luck. He built and maintained a high level of fitness throughout his life, beginning in the 1930s, when very few people exercised regularly and fitness centers did not yet exist. As he got older, he set out very deliberately to defy the stereotype of aging as a period of misery and decline. He did the work and he succeeded, giving us a glimpse of what an older person is truly capable of achieving, end of quote. So there's one example, but yes, I think it's true that, again, whenever you start is going to be better. And yeah, you can even start at later ages. That's going to be better than not starting at all. And grip strength is important. Muscle mass is important. And again, just getting started, just doing some small things, but then showing up every day and doing those small things, building on it. That's really the strategy. That's what we want to have in mind. And then we can drill down more specifically on what exactly we can do to really maximize the time that we spend, what's most effective. Becky, any other thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's slowly convincing me to make a move in my personal life, because it's really difficult to make that time. Although once you're in that habit, I think it's probably very easy to maintain. I like how you say that you can build on it. So start simple, build on that each day, little by little. It can gradually go into something more in depth, but I think we get like caught up like, oh my goodness, I can't just start like 45 minutes a day. I've done that, and you're like sore and you're drained and you're like, oh, this is not doable. You know what I mean? When you have to take care of 6 kids or whatnot. So it's good to know you can just slowly work at it and get more and more fit as time goes on, and then just maintain that your entire life. It should be just not like, okay, I'm going to do this for 3 months, but part of your lifestyle, right?
Yeah. And one of the tools he uses to help people to really get motivated and to really use their minds, wrap their minds around this and get their minds really working for them in terms of motivation and being excited about this, is to think about what you want your life to be like in your later years. Imagine you're in your 70s, 80s, 90s. What do you want to be able to do? How do you envision yourself? Do you want to be in your 90s and be capable of picking up a grandchild or a great-grandchild and holding them? Well, you better have a certain level of fitness up to that point to be capable of that. Do you want to still be able to go out for walks in your 80s and 90s? Do you want to be able to be quite active? Do you want to be able to do something even greater, to be able to take a more extensive walk on a trail in the woods with a loved one? Do you want to have the balance and the ability to do that? Well, we have to work towards that to be able to have those capabilities later on. We'll be right back with more. Stay tuned.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. Passed by Congress in 1994 with bipartisan support, the FACE Act protects abortion clinics, but also pro-life facilities and churches. Pro-life critics say the Biden White House is instead targeting mostly pro-life political enemies. They say violence and fire bombings of pregnancy support centers and churches, bigoted graffiti and death threats are taking backseat to prosecuting grandmothers in peaceful civil disobedience. Real violence and over 500 attacks is ignored, and the grandmothers get long prison sentences. Closer examination of the bill rejected by Senate Democrats Wednesday shows why it should never be described by its right to contraception moniker. The bill included a right to teen transgender surgeries. It funded contraception. It could be interpreted to legalize abortion federally and would erode religious liberty. This is Life News Radio. A culture of life has a rarely mentioned but very formidable enemy. Pornography is material that deceives its consumers into thinking that they possess beauty, while the reality is they are possessed by a lie. The first step may be to talk openly with your pastor or confessor, reject the lie, and recognize that a culture of life relies upon you. National Right to Life's Dave Andrusko is assessing a new book that opposes sex selection abortions. He says the world today is missing 163 million females by sex-selective abortions. And state attorneys wanted a dismissal, but a religious discrimination lawsuit is moving forward. Mike and Kitty Burke applied as foster parents in Massachusetts, but were rejected for their religious beliefs about marriage and sexuality. The couple's Beckett Fund attorneys say it's an important first step in a case that could have national impact. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here. Let's just get into the last bit here that we can get in today, following this book, Outlive, Dr. Peter Attia, and some interesting points worth considering. He says this, when we're talking about basically when it comes to exercise, really getting very specific, it's cardio, it's strength training, and it's stability, right? So again, have those categories in mind, some aerobic training, cardio, strength training, and stability. So even just think about how you can work on your balance, and just doing some small things working on your balance is helpful, right? So to have these goals to make sure you have good balance, to have these goals to make sure you've got good strength, good muscle mass, that you have good force in your muscles. You can push and pull things with some good force, and that you also have this good respiratory condition, and you want to ramp these things up as we go. So again, we got to show up, we got to start off, and then we can ramp them up as we go. To think of yourself in the future in a way that, you know what, I can really, I can see great results based on doing these things, and sort of imagine you having those great results sometime in the future, and then work towards it. Start doing the things that are going to get you to this place. Now, when it comes to cardio, he says when we say cardio, we're talking about not one thing, but a physiologic continuum ranging from an easy walk to an all-out sprint. The various levels of intensity all count as cardio, but are fueled to multiply different energy systems. For our purposes, we are interested in two particular regions of this continuum: long, steady endurance work, such as jogging or cycling or swimming. So you want to maybe get to this point where you can be doing some of this, where we are training in what physiologists call zone 2 and maximal aerobic efforts, where VO2 max comes into play. So these are these two categories, zone 2 and then the maximal aerobic efforts. So when it comes to zone 2, it says that, well, first of all, let's get into this. Aerobic exercise done in a very specific way improves our ability to utilize glucose and especially fat as fuel. A little science here. The key here are the mitochondria, those tiny little intracellular organelles that produce much of our energy. These cellular engines can burn both glucose and fat, and thus they are fundamental to our metabolic health. Healthy mitochondria are also important to maintaining the health of our brain and to controlling potential bad actors like oxidative stress and inflammation. I am convinced that it is impossible to be healthy without also having healthy mitochondria, which is why I place a great deal of emphasis on long, steady endurance training in Zone 2. Zone 2 is one of the 5 levels of intensity used by coaches and trainers in endurance sport to structure their athletes' training programs. It can get confusing because some coaches define training zones in terms of heart rate, others on different levels of power output. Adding to the confusion, some models have 5 zones, others have 6 or 7, but typically Zone 1 is a walk in the park, and Zone 5 or 6 or 7 is an all-out sprint. So Zone 2 is more or less the same in all training models, going at a speed slow enough that one can still maintain a conversation, but fast enough that the conversation might be a little strained. It translates to aerobic activity at a pace somewhere between easy and moderate. So I think this would be good news for people, right? This doesn't mean you have to be doing such high intensity work. In fact, Zone 2 is very, very important for this healthy mitochondria, right? And so it's not the easiest walk, but you're still able to have a conversation, but it's a little bit strained, right? So for someone just starting off, this would be just a little bit of a faster walk. And the great thing about this is that once you get good at that, then you'd want to take it to the next level. You'd have to take it to the next level to stay in Zone 2. No longer would a fast walk get you to Zone 2. You're able to carry on a conversation easily without any discomfort. And so then, therefore, you take it to the next level. Maybe it's a light jog at that point, and then maybe you get real good at that, and then maybe it's a more a little bit stronger jog, so on and so forth. So, but we want to be doing some work in this Zone 2 area, and I would say, so if you can do that 13 minutes a day or 90 minutes a week of Zone 2, that's going to do a huge amount of good for you based on what we're seeing here with the data. Becky, your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's interesting. It's kind of like the more that you work at it, you're going to get stronger. And so it'll keep you going because that won't be as hard anymore. That won't be as difficult to do that fast walk or whatnot, or even a bike ride. That sounds like something that would be a Zone 2 type of exercise, like a nice bike ride. That would naturally push yourself to keep going. And so that it makes sense, but that's kind of just start here and you'll just keep going more and more because your body will respond and it won't be such a challenge. And that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what's also going to help with that VO2 max is to mix in once in a while a little high intensity interval training to improve the cardiovascular health and endurance. So that would be some sort of like interval training where you're doing a sprint for a short amount of time and then you walk for a little bit, then you sprint again, then you walk a little bit. But again, this can be based on wherever you're at. So maybe this is a slow walk for a little bit, then you fast walk for a little bit stronger, and then you slow walk again, then you fast walk. But you're wanting to get this interval higher than what you would be at a Zone 2. This is where you want to get into like the Zone 5, where you're getting up close to as fast as you can kind of go based on your exercise level at that point, right? Again, you don't want to overdo these things. You want to start off slow and ramp up slowly. And so, you want to be careful about that, especially if you're just starting off. But that's going to help you as well. So if you can basically hit the two ends of this, which is a good amount of time in that Zone 2, which is a rather comfortable activity. Really, it's, you're getting out in nature and it's not like a lot of discomfort. You're still able to to do it quite comfortably, really. And then you're doing this interval training once in a while, maybe once a week, where you're mixing that in and then doing a little bit higher intensity there. And then that's where you want to get to in terms of your aerobic exercise, and do a little strength training, and then some flexibility and balance stuff. You can try to find out some good tactics for that, and then yeah, that's pretty much what you want to be looking at in terms of exercise, based on what we're seeing here in terms of what Dr. Attia is recommending. Then we've got the nutrition, the sleep, the stress management. We can get into those. A lot of this stuff overlaps with many of these topics, as we've talked about in the past. A lot of this stuff being stuff that is fairly common sense, really. But I think in the exercise area, it was worth us kind of diving in and really getting very specific on it, and saying, okay, how can I get going on this, or how can I modify what I'm doing based on this information? Seems helpful to me. Becky, your final thoughts today?
Yeah, I think it shows you that it's a process, and that's good to go slow with it, but also that it's kind of like a necessity if you want to have that type of life where you have, the longevity that you're looking for, but also just the health and the quality of life that the numbers are in your side, when you live this way. So it's definitely motivating and helps me personally to kind of realize that, yeah, there's no perfect time to start. So just kind of make a move and go slow with it. And in time, your body will respond, and it's good. It's good to know that the older you get, like, you can still be strong. You can still lift weights. You can still exercise. I think that's just the lie that many people believe, especially women, like, oh, you're going to break a bone, or now you have osteoporosis and you can't like lift weights. And actually that, the study on saying like it actually protects you from falls. And so that's really important to know. And yeah, really good information.
Yeah. And I'll add in, Dr. Attia really hit the data on the physical side. And I would just add on the stress management side, or the emotional side, where he's saying he's pretty sure this is also correlative there. And I would just say personally, anecdotally, and I think we saw this in the survey as well, is that it really, my personal experience is, yes, the best I feel all day is after my exercise in the morning. I feel great. It really is something that once you're into it, it is something that I think it does make you feel good physically, but also helps you to just feel good. I think emotionally, mentally, it does great things for the brain as well. So a lot of good stuff there. Just want to encourage you, wherever you're at, to take that next step, certainly when it comes to the spiritual life, but also in the physical life as well. We want to be strong in the soul, strong in mind, strong in body. And I believe God wants to help us to be strong and healing and strengthening ourselves in all these areas. God bless you.